And I look at her and I say, how do you choose joy when your heart is breaking in a million pieces? How do you choose joy? The police came, broke the door down, found the inevitable bad news.
A spiritual icon's grip on everything he built is slipping through his fingers, and nobody saw it coming until it was far too late. For decades, one man commanded the devotion of millions, standing confidently before crowds who believed in him absolutely. Today, that carefully assembled world is fracturing in ways even his closest allies never anticipated. The minister facing demolition of his empire, the church membership in turmoil, and a legacy that's becoming unrecognizable. This is where his story pivots from triumph to something far darker. 3 years back, the denomination that ordained him delivered a stunning rebuke. The Southern Baptist Convention, once his institutional home, didn't simply express displeasure or issue quiet reprimands. They performed a public severing, a complete expulsion. The organization removed him entirely, stripping away the church he'd spent his entire life constructing from absolute nothing into one of North America's largest congregations. The vote wasn't even close. Thousands of clergy packed into a convention hall in New Orleans and voted almost uniformly to sever ties with someone they'd previously elevated to hero status. At Saddleback Zenith, the congregation swelled past 25,000 worshipers distributed across 14 separate locations every single Sunday. That scale of achievement eludes most shepherds across their whole careers. Imagine waking one morning to discover you've lost that entire foundation instantly, publicly, before the very audience who once revered you as proof of spiritual success. The wound was catastrophic, yet simultaneously something more devastating was unfolding inside his own physiology. In 2023, he disclosed to a podcast audience that he'd been wrestling with an excruciating autoimmune condition for 24 months preceding. The illness had ravaged his muscular system, creating relentless discomfort throughout his frame. He characterized the sensation as a consciousness burning fiercely while imprisoned in a disobedient vessel. Medical professionals estimated the affliction might persist for 3, perhaps 5, years total. 3 years have elapsed, yet he's never publicly stated whether liberation finally arrived. Have you ever witnessed someone you profoundly respected gradually surrender everything they poured their lifetime into constructing, all while maintaining composure before cameras? That's what distinguishes this narrative. This isn't simply a public figure ensnared in scandal headlines. This represents someone whose entire foundation, medical, institutional, ecclesiastical, dismantled sequentially before spectators everywhere. Yet he continued delivering sermons through every single collapse. And the successor he specifically selected to inherit his life's greatest accomplishment, that's precisely where circumstances transform into genuinely uncomfortable terrain. In June 2022, he presented to worshipers the individual designated to steer the organization forward. This man was Andy Wood, directing a multi-site operation called Echo Church in Silicon Valley territory. But within days of the announcement, previous workers from Wood's ministry surfaced with allegations. They portrayed him as administering through intimidation, demanding absolute subordination, methodically removing anyone questioning his authority. Saddleback initiated an investigation and exonerated Wood within weeks. Long-standing congregation members, though, felt unsettled, trusting their leader's judgment seemed suddenly uncertain. A fresh controversy rapidly materialized. Media outlets discovered Wood had formally interviewed Mark Driscoll at some prior leadership, gathering the identical Mark Driscoll, who'd exited his own megachurch in disgrace amid accusations involving harassment, intellectual dishonesty, and authoritarian misconduct. Wood subsequently expressed regret, describing it as an error causing genuine suffering, though this admission emerged only following sustained public grievance. Under Wood's stewardship, Saddleback has encountered fresh turbulence. Reports link the organization to Embracing the Journey, an LGBTQ-affirming program for families. The ministry was co-founded by a Saddleback employee whose own offspring identified as transgender, and institutional leadership ostensibly presented it as supportive guidance for comparable circumstances. Commentators additionally asserted the Church once conducted worship exclusively for African American participants, marketed internally as therapeutic ground. Those specific narratives predominantly surface from ideologically slanted sources rather than mainstream journalism, warranting skepticism rather than definitive acceptance. Yet even that contested version raises troublesome questions. When visionary leaders depart, how substantially does their original creation persist recognizably? The authentic reason his institutional position collapsed transcends simple aging or biological decline. His genuine ordeal originated from theological tensions internally brewing for years, a struggle that sparked his authentic unraveling. To comprehend why this institutional superpower ultimately renounced its most celebrated theologian, you must rewind to 2021, when he executed a quiet decision. He authorized female ordinations, 3 women accepting pastoral appointments at his congregation. Superficially, it resembled routine administrative bureaucracy. Within Baptist governance structures, it registered as ideological rebellion. The convention's foundational tenets explicitly confined pastoral roles to men exclusively. He violated that restriction publicly, at the denomination's second-largest institution. He declined to apologize. Later that June, he ascended to the convention platform in Anaheim and improvised a rebuttal that startled even sympathetic observers. He reminded delegates of everything Saddleback contributed institutionally across 40 years, instructing them to terminate arguing over marginal theological concerns. Momentarily, reconciliation looked feasible. Committees postponed immediate judgment. Tranquility fractured swiftly. February 2023 brought formal expulsion through Baptist leadership structures. The reason? His female ordinations explicitly cited. He contested the verdict that following June in New Orleans, confronting identical audience members who'd earlier treated him like spiritual royalty, cautioning that dismissing congregations accelerated denominational deterioration already underway. He lost decisively. More than 9,000 delegates opposed him, fewer than 1,000 supported reversal. Yet he proclaimed that 11 million digital followers exceeded denominational boundaries, demonstrating broader influence. He concluded stating truth transcends tradition, drawing restrained applause from sympathizers, silence from others. Unexamined is the catalyst granting him conviction to jeopardize everything: institutional standing, personal reputation. 4 decades of accumulated prestige over a solitary staffing choice he'd conveniently circumvented. The solution contains virtually zero theological substance. It traces directly to a telephone conversation occurring one evening in April 2013, an ordinary moment that reconstructed his worldview entirely. That April evening, his youngest progeny, Matthew, age 27, concluded his existence. The young man had battled psychiatric complications since childhood, traversing treatment from renowned specialists and potent pharmaceuticals without achieving inner tranquility. Warren distributed a congregational message that weekend articulating that vocabulary couldn't adequately communicate the torment his household experienced. He recollected an interaction from earlier years when teenage Matthew questioned if perishing might finally terminate his internal suffering. Warren responded that paternal responsibility precluded surrender, that he'd perpetually pursue solutions, even should his offspring believe alternatives exhausted. What followed revealed dimensions about Warren that antagonists seldom acknowledge. Within days, he publicly extended absolution toward the anonymous individual who'd illegally merchandised the weapon to his boy, transmitting this grace to approximately 1 million observers while inhabiting the deepest grief imaginable. He and his spouse stayed media silent for half-year duration, subsequently participating in one collaborative television interview where his wife recharacterized the death not congregational shortcoming, but tragic convergence of psychiatric crisis and singular impulsive instant nobody could have interrupted. Every collapse eventually teaches us something we desperately needed to learn. Research from that time frame indicated nearly half of evangelical worshippers maintained belief that severe psychological illness responded exclusively to spiritual intercession, exactly contrary to positions Warren championed afterward. 16 weeks following interment, he reappeared before 5,000 congregants receiving thunderous ovation. Committing his remaining existence to confronting stigma encompassing psychological disorders in ecclesiastical spaces that habitually misconstrued despair as spiritual deficiency instead of physiological dysfunction. Such sorrow irreversibly transforms individuals, elucidating substantially why years onward he accepted jeopardy defending those three ordained females rather than silently acquiescing to institutional tradition he'd begun comprehending profoundly differently. Yet preceding either confrontation, Warren had navigated a completely distinct tempest bearing no connection to institutional governance. Everything connected to executive leadership. In December 2008, incoming President Barack Obama selected Warren for delivering prayer at inaugural ceremonies, intending religious connection with evangelical demographics nationwide. Instead, simultaneous explosions erupted everywhere. LGBTQ advocates felt betrayed Warren had that identical autumn advocated publicly for Proposition 8, eliminating same-sex matrimonial recognition statewide in California. Concurrently, anti-abortion evangelicals raged at Warren for apparently legitimizing a progressive-leaning executive through participatory prayer. For unprecedented weeks, Warren had somehow angered virtually every faction simultaneously. During concurrent developments, Uganda encountered uproar. Warren maintained institutional connections there through charitable endeavors. When lawmakers introduced mortality penalties for homosexual orientation, a locally connected pastor supported it. Adversaries blamed Warren's influence permitting such legislation advancement. He eventually severed those partnerships and circulated condemnation, yet exclusively following persistent universal outcry. Not beforehand. African ecclesiastical leaders responded with reciprocal hostility, demanding restitution for supposedly weaponizing his position against continental populations. Another distinct controversy detonated domestically. Warren appended his identity to interfaith documentation alongside Muslim spiritual authorities, sparking accusations of advocating syncretistic faith that detractors called Chrislam. He categorically refuted believing Christians and Muslims acknowledged identical divinity, characterizing the allegation itself as falsehood stubbornly persisting irrespective of repeated disclaimers. By resolution, Warren assimilated a fundamental understanding destined to silently characterize his subsequent existence. Positioning yourself between America's factional warfare doesn't establish security from either coalition. It manufactures targeting from both simultaneously. Standing in the middle only makes you a target from both directions at once. Yet throughout his institutional construction and every ensuing firestorm, one individual maintained presence, the partner observing his reputation's genesis before presidents or ecclesiastical bodies learned identification. For generations, Rick and Kay Warren projected idealized matrimonial companionship before thousands weekly. However, their conjugal arrangement almost fractured before legitimate commencement. During their honeymoon in British Columbia, Kay revealed childhood sexual violation perpetrated within her father's ecclesiastical jurisdiction. Young Rick, barely 20-something years chronologically, struggled comprehending trauma's psychological architecture and relational consequences. By their second anniversarial marker, Kay has since disclosed both inhabited what she terminology as matrimonial nightmare, battling relentlessly behind residential walls, while performing flawless domesticity for congregations remaining oblivious their shepherd's personal life disintegrated systematically. She subsequently divulged harboring undisclosed humiliation, encompassing intimate and corporeal shame secrets preserved from her companion for extended duration, eventually surfacing via professional therapeutic intervention and substantial chronological investment. This disclosure possesses significance transcending mere gossip framework. The Warrens converted that private devastation directly into ecclesiastical programming, establishing recovery mechanisms and advisory systems at Saddleback, subsequently channeling comprehension of mortification and concealment into international psychological health initiatives confronting viral plague stigmatization across continents. Anguish they safeguarded from 20,000 observers eventually transformed into capacity facilitating millions of external individuals instead. Consider that critically, should the idealized matrimonial existence everyone praised actually rest upon foundations of that magnitude of obscured suffering, everything constituting Warren's meticulously engineered public personage presumably originated identically fundamentally, extending backward to institutional genesis itself, predating Saddleback's very nomenclature emergence. He entered existence January 1954 in San Jose, California, offspring of ecclesiastical minister and municipal information specialist. He experienced vocational summoning before completing secondary education. Through final seminary years, he surrendered opportunity shepherding thriving congregation of 5,000 in Texan territory, preferring instead constructing something completely unprecedented within unfamiliar Southern California geography. He transported himself, domestic partner, leased conveyance, and meager finances to Saddleback Valley in December 1979. 14 days subsequently, he'd inaugurated modest scriptural exploration gathering with single neighboring household, congregating within residential condominium walls. Preceding inaugural public proclamation, he systematically knocked upon 100 residential thresholds, repeatedly interrogating inhabitants why abandoned congregational participation or never participated whatsoever. Responses: tedium, uninviting reception, monetary solicitation directionally shaped his subsequent institutional construction. Opening observance transpired Palm Sunday 80 within rented theater, drawing 205 attendees, predominantly churchless demographics. Following weak attendance fractured by half. Unmentioned by historians, that inaugural year, his corporeal organism failed. Adrenaline dysregulation manifested acutely, destabilizing visual acuity whilst positioned at proclamation podium, forcing physiological deterioration preceding institutional establishment. The identical individual subsequently instructing millions that tribulation harbors purposefulness nearly perished, acquiring personal comprehension of that maxim. Subsequent institutional development, commercial publications, renunciation of monetary compensation, philanthropic distribution commitments, everything originated from that singular tormented year seldom examined. Projections from later academic research suggested institutional maturation would accommodate 20,000 congregants across 100 acres. Prediction approaching remarkable actualization. Determination ignited best-selling manuscripts, revenue renunciation, and documented philanthropic intention. Everything originated with youthful ecclesiastic who deteriorated before 200 observers, yet declined discontinuation. This contemporary moment returns to narrative commencement. A person who constructed institutional empire from personal ruination currently encounters deterioration. His philosophical framework inadequately prepared him for institutional severance, physiological deterioration, inheritance controlled by unfamiliar custodian. Warren invested lifetime emphasizing that catastrophe communicates intention. Yet observe what circumstances his existence currently teaches us all. Demonstrate within commentary sections your honest interpretations. What conclusion should Warren's remaining narrative trajectory impart? What does his particular collapse instruct about institutional stewardship, theological conviction, and sustained faithfulness? If you resonate with Crime Brief's investigative narrative frameworks, demonstrate affirmation through engagement like this presentation, subscribe maintaining continuous narrative revelation.